Good morning, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear participants of our permanent seminar, international philosophical online seminar that was founded near 2 years ago. And today we have extraordinary event from 2 points. First of all, one of the initiator, motivator of our postscriptum seminar, Professor Christoph Lumer, is here in Odessa, in Ukraine. We are sitting in the Department of Philosophy, Odessa National University. Despite all troubles, all dangerous events, we can communicate face to face, eyes by eyes, and to have a fruitful discussion in philosophy. Second one, it's a first collaboration with the Institute of Philosophy, National Academy of Science of Ukraine, and my great greeting to Professor Vitaly Lyakh, to Professor Tatiana Gardashuk, especially initiated and motivated this event, Svetlana Valinchenko. And let's start maybe. We are here and you know our program today, but I would like to start from the presentation of the Department of Western Philosophy, National Academy of Ukraine, because I believe it will be fruitful and ongoing cooperation. Vitaly Vasilievich, tell me please, because I don't see all participants here, who can present some sphere of research and sphere of our common interest. Yaroslav Любивый, please sound. Svetlana, I don't see, I don't listen.
Oh, I cannot see Yaroslav Любивый yet.
Yes, maybe we will start as you wish, Vitaly Vasilievich. Please, your advice, how we can start? From the invitation from Institute of Philosophy or from our presentation? Please, 1-2 minutes we are waiting, because it was our plan to start with the presentation of.
Maybe if Yaroslav Любивый is not here, maybe some words from the Institute of Philosophy will be spoken by Tatiana.
Maybe Tatiana. Just we close the window, yeah?
You mean you are talking to me? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to be present in this online seminar, at least for me and my colleagues in Kiev. And I'm happy that you can have this seminar in present in Odessa. It is really very important to have such communication with our foreign colleague, with Professor Lumer, face by face, and it's a very great gesture of support of Ukraine from Professor Lumer to be present in Ukraine in this very difficult time for us and very dangerous time, be honestly, for all of us, because and it is really very great gesture of support of our academic Ukrainian academy and scientific and philosophical community. Not to talk a lot, I would like to say that it is very important as for me as a representative and the head of the Department of Logic and Methodology of Science in the Institute of Philosophy. This cooperation with Inna Golubovich, with community of the seminar, postscriptum seminar, is very important for invites to different philosophical problems, and I hope that this morning seminar will be a new, fresh, new fresh wave in our scientific community, and we are looking for fruitful discussion afterwards. And so I look forward for listening to Professor Lumer. Professor Lumer, and to greet him in Ukraine, and to so I'll
It's okay.
The connection is interrupted.
There is some lag in the connection.
I think
Trouble. Do you listen us, Svetlana?
Yes, I can hear you well.
We are living today in the very, very fragile and flexible situation, and we have to change our condition each minute. Let's start our presentation. How many?
Excuse me. And we have Professor Yaroslav Lyubivy, if it's possible to.
Yes, of course.
Greet him.
I thank you. Dear Professor Christoph Lumer, dear colleagues from the Ilya Mechnikov Odessa University, dear colleagues from the Department of History of Foreign Philosophy of the Grigory Skovoroda Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine, as well as colleagues from the other departments of our institute. Dear guest, allow me to convey to your greeting and sincere wishes for success in the work of seminar from the management of the Institute of Philosophy, and personally from the director, corresponding member of the Academy of Science of Ukraine, Anatoly Mykolaievich Yermolenko. The Department of the History of Foreign Philosophy is very pleased to participate in the work of the International Seminar Postscriptum, since the specificity of our research line in understanding in the achievement and idea of foreign philosophy. Our current topic is called Transformation of Basic and Spiritual Values in the War and Peace, an approach of history of philosophy. The department explores a wide range of philosophical problems of history of philosophy: freedom, personality, identity, rationalism, transformation of the foundations of philosophy, problems of philosophical translation, historical and socio-cultural content of philosophical knowledge, etc. The aggravation of the military political situation and economic wars in the modern global world stimulates the department reaches to focus attention, in addition to traditional issues, also on the problems of violence and freedom, the transformation of values, changes in world view, orientations, and a number of socio-philosophical and moral problems. So today's topic in our seminar arouses interest in us. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, San Yaroslave. And let's start. Thank you for this presentation. I hope we will continue to communicate. And I would like to add that our scientific team, scientific topic of our department is called by natural picture of the world in contemporary time. We have a coincidence in our interest and we will cooperate together. Thank you so much. And just now, I would like to give a possibility to speak with us, Professor Christoph Lumer, University of Siena, Italy, and you know our topic. And we have to discuss maybe timing of this. How many times you have to discuss, present your topic, and after that, free discussion. As usually now at the time of our seminar, Svetlana Balinchenko knows, Tatiana Gerdashuk knows our style of free communication. How many time you need for?
I think 45 minutes or so, yeah.
45?
Yeah.
Prepare yourself to 45 minutes of attention to very, very interesting and inspiring topic. Let's start, please. Now it's only your place. I will be listener again. After that, I will come back.
Thank you very much to all of you who have made this very kind introduction. First of all, to Professor Yaroslav, thank you to you for your kind introduction, to Professor Gardashuk for her kind introduction as well, and for Professor Balinchenko for organizing it, and most of all, of course, and in first line to Professor Golubovich, who brought me here and who organizes this seminar series. And I'm very glad to be here and to show my support to the Ukrainian interest. And so I would like to do it with a conference on this topic here, Welfarism and Instrumentalist Praxeology for Welfare Ethics. Okay, so I hope you can read that. The right part of the presentation, unfortunately, is a bit covered by the pictures, but I hope you can read enough from it. So that is the topic here. Okay, I have to go into that. So let me start with the first part. Introduction. Welfare ethics and the project of praxeology. My lecture is on an ethical question, namely the main ethical question: what should we do from a moral point of view? It presents a theory on this topic called instrumental welfarism. This is a theory within the spectrum of welfare ethics, such as utilitarianism, egalitarianism, or prioritarianism, but goes beyond the approaches developed there so far in the following ways. First, the ethical question of what we should do is usually answered with a theory of moral duties. Apart from the often highly controversial proposals regarding the content of these duties, however, the ontological nature of these duties is very unclear. Are they, for example, imperatives? And if so, by whom? And with what authority? Instrumental welfare theory proposes that moral imperatives are constituted by morally good social norms. Social norms are widely accepted rules of conduct. Let me go ahead. Are widely accepted rules of conduct with a particular group, the known violation of which is generally punished formally by specially authorized persons or institutions, or informally by any person. Morally good social norms, including moral duties, are instruments for the moral improvement of the world. Second, the other part of instrument welfarism, which goes beyond traditional welfarism, consists in an expansion of the instruments considered for the moral improvement of the world. Morally good social norms are not the only instruments for the moral improvement of the world. Virtues, rules, moral education, institutions, organizations, states, confederations of states, and of course individual actions can also be such instruments, namely when they are primarily or to a significant extent aimed at improving the world morally. Exploring, developing, and proposing such possible instruments and guidelines for their application is then the task of a comprehensive instrumentalist praxeology in ethics that goes beyond the theory of moral duties. I said that instrument welfarism is a theory within the spectrum of welfare ethics, such as utilitarianism, egalitarianism, or prioritarianism. I would therefore like to begin by explaining this decision in favor of welfare ethics. Welfare ethics belong to the value ethics or axiological ethics. These are ethics that first determine what is prudential or morally good, and only then determine what should be done morally, in particular, what moral duties there are. For value ethics, therefore, values, individual utility, and moral desirability are conceptually, epistemically, and ontologically primary. Moral duties or virtues are conceptually, epistemologically, and ontologically secondary. An alternative to this is duty ethics or deontological ethics. Here it is the other way around. Moral duties are conceptually, epistemically, and ontologically primary, while individual and moral values are virtues are secondary in this respect. Another important alternative is virtue ethics or eretic ethics, according to which moral virtues are conceptually, epistemically, and ontologically primary, and values of duties are secondary. The following three reasons speak in favor of axiologism, that is the value theory and a value theoretic approach. Axiologism corresponds to the human decision-making structure. People make decisions like decision theory does. They choose between several, at least two, options available to them by evaluating the consequences of these options that they consider relevant, and then selecting that one option with the best consequences. Second, this decision-making mechanism is evolutionary and rationally far superior to phylogenetic and earlier decision-making mechanisms. The second highest of these are learned stimulus-response mechanisms. Higher non-human animals learn from experience if a behavior R performed in a certain situation S has produced a positive consequence. Then the connection SR, stimulus response, is reinforced. The animal will tend to perform behavior R in situations of type S in the future. The opposite is true for negative experiences. This is learning by trial and error only. One must make certain attempts to find out whether a certain behavior could be good or not. Axiological decision-making is considerably better in this respect. It does not rely on concrete attempts, but can also decide in new situations according to the predicted consequences. This makes it also much more flexible, allowing it to react to particular favorable situations and seize opportunities. It can take place without any specific reason. One decides whether a certain action would be good at a given moment. Through advanced planning, very long-term consequences can be pursued. By incorporating further actions of one's own within the framework of overall planning, enormously complex, comprehensive actions can be planned with correspondingly demanding goals that can be achieved, such as the writing of a book, obtaining a diploma, and so on. Third, only the referring to values is it possible to justify actions or rules, namely as an orientation towards what can give this object significance. In axiological systems, these are the positively evaluated consequences of actions or prevented negative events. In stimulus-response learning, these are the positive or negative experiences after the attempt, ultimately something that has a value structure. In deontologism, on the other hand, acceptable rules must be selected. Here too, it would make sense to do this on the basis of evaluations. In Kant's first categorical imperative, the practical imperative, the selection criterion is, however, that I can want a certain law to be universally realized. But why should I commit myself to this particular form of law? Kant says it is moral, but why should I be interested in this kind of morality? Here again, evaluations would be necessary that reflect my interest. For example, incidentally, I can also very well want everyone else to do everything that is good for Christoph Lumer. Of course, no one will do that except perhaps myself. But the fact that I can want it is enough for this egoism to be a moral imperative accepted according to the practical imperative. Why welfare ethics among axiological ethics? I will leave it at the simple answer that welfare ethics is by far the most widespread approach among axiological ethics. However, I would add to this something within welfare ethics, namely the ontological question, is in very different ways conceptualized, and respectively the discussion about it is particularly alive in welfare ethics. Now here. Having explained why I'm using a welfare ethical approach, the answer to the moral question of what we should do, I must now situate the project pursued here within welfare ethics. A complete welfare ethics consists of 3 parts. Sorry. So here, components of complete welfare ethics. The first part is a utility theory, a theory of individual prudential utility that defines the criteria for what is good for individuals. Examples include hedonism, preferentialism, and the theory of objective goods. The second part is moral axiology or value theory. That is a theory of moral desirability or moral utility or moral value. This moral value is aggregated from individual utility in welfare ethics. Such axiologies include utilitarianism, in which moral value simply consists of the sum of individual utilities, or utility egalitarianism, prioritarianism, sufficiency, or leximen. And the third part of the theory is deontology or praxeology. This is a theory of moral duties. These are defined with the help of the concept of moral desirability. Different theories on this are, for example, act utilitarianism, according to which one must always do the morally best, rule utilitarianism, norm utilitarianism, or act prioritarianism, and so on. This third part can also be defined more generally, not as deontology, but as praxeology, as a theory about what we should do in practice with a moral evaluation that can be made with the help of the moral desirability criteria defined in axiology. The rest of my lecture will focus on this third part of welfare ethics, praxeology, because the solutions discussed for this can be combined relatively freely with the various proposals for moral axiology. or even for utility theory, I do not assume any specific axiology here, but speak generally of welfarism instead of, for example, utilitarianism or prioritarianism. The lecture has two constructive goals. First, I will outline the idea and tasks of praxeology in general. Second, I will outline a specific theory of praxeology, which I call instrument welfarism, by analogy with, for instance, act welfarism or rule welfarism. Instrument welfarism also includes a deontology, that is a theory of moral duties, namely progressive, normative, norm-welfarism. More on this in a second. However, unlike all other welfarist praxeologies mentioned above, instrumental welfarism goes beyond deontology. It sees moral duties only as one instrument, among others, for realizing moral values or increasing moral desirability, for improving the world, and aims precisely at a general theory of instruments for realizing moral values. Other such instruments include supererogatory acts, virtues, institutions, organizations, states, and confederations of states. The nature of these instruments and their contribution to the realization of moral value are outlined, and the tasks and structure of instrument welfarism will be elaborated. So I have to go down here. So these are some of the instruments I mentioned that can be used in instrument welfarism. So the outline of my talk then will be, after brief critique of utilitarianism, an alternative theory of moral duties is outlined, progressive norm welfarism. That is number 2 here. And then number 3, the completely different way of defining moral duties, as well as some approaches from welfare ethics, point to an extension of the third part of welfare ethics from deontology to praxeology. The desiderata and general content of such a praxeology are outlined. Then part 4, a specific program of a welfarist praxeology is then presented, instrumental welfarism. And instrumental welfarism is then explained in more detail. And then the last part, in the concluding section, some of the instruments considered by instrumental welfarism are examined in more detail. So I come now to my second section, which will be shorter, so only for deontology, progressive norm welfarism. The best known welfare ethical deontology is act utilitarianism, or in accordance with the axiological neutrality practiced here, act welfarism. This is known to establish a single general duty, moral duty, the general duty of optimizing or maximizing. Always do what is welfaristically best. Act utilitarianism has been heavily criticized. I will only briefly mention the most important criticisms from the literature here. First, maximization duty, maximization duty is excessive. It places excessive demands on moral subjects who must devote their entire lives to morality. For example, people from the richer parts of the world would have to give so much of their income and wealth to the absolutely poor of this world that they themselves would no longer be far from the brink of absolute poverty. Or if the lives of several people can only be saved by sacrificing a different subject's own vital organs, then the latter person would have to sacrifice himself or herself accordingly. Second, the maximization duty leads to the violation of human rights. Example, if I do not make myself available for this exacerbation in the last example, then the doctors should simply remove my organs without my consent. Third, the individualism of decision leads to a lack of social coordination. So do always your best. Fourth, it also leads to lengthy deliberations. What is the best? It destroys good rule-based institutions and is therefore inefficient. Example, my neighbor has 3 cars I have none. It would be morally much better if I took one of his cars, which I could use so well. Fifth criticism. Sixth. The exclusive universalism of practical evaluation destroys personal relations. 7. The ontology of the commandment remains unclear. Above all, this commandment is not binding. It is merely an ethical sermon with no binding character. In short, act welfarism is a non-starter. I have developed an alternative welfarist conception of moral duties elsewhere called progressive norm welfarism, and it attempts to avoid all the problems mentioned above by addressing the problem of ontology and bindingness. According to this conception, moral duties are constituted by morally good, socially valid norms. In other words, it is my moral duty to do something if a morally good social norm requires it. A socially valid norm is a course of action that is widely followed in the social group. Known deviations from this course of action are usually punished. In the case of formal legal norms, these punishments are carried out by specifically appointed agents. In the case of informal norms, however, these punishments are carried out by any person with appropriate motivation, ranging from critically frowning to lynch justice. The general moral imperative is then follow the socially accepted norms that are good in a welfarist sense. However, social norms do not fall from the sky, nor do they maintain themselves. Rather, new norms must first be socially enforced and then maintained. This requires two new types of moral actions beyond the observance of moral imperatives. Namely, first, moral political commitment refers to political actions that aim to enforce morally good norms or to improve socially accepted norms morally. And the second type of new action is norm support, and that is an action aimed at maintaining a social norm, such as monitoring compliance with a norm and punishing those who violate it, providing information about the norm, and promoting it. So I come now to my third part. Oh, that is a bit, perhaps it can be better. So the desideratum of a general praxeology. That is the third part. The third part of welfare ethics is generally equated with deontology, without further ado. However, the progressive norm welfarism just outlined already goes beyond traditional deontology. First, it is not more realistic in the strong sense, that is epistemologically and ontologically, that is, it does not presuppose any externally valid moral duties that are independent of our attitudes and actions. Rather, it is social constructivist. Moral norms must first be established through active engagement. Second, these norms are understood as means of morally improving the world. Morally good, socially valid norms counteract, among other things, the lack of motivation and encouraging people to act in accordance with morality. Third, finally, progressive norm welfarism includes types of moral action that do not consist in the fulfillment of moral duties, namely norm support and moral political commitment. However, the general social constructivist idea of creating instruments for the moral improvement of the world pursued in progressive norm welfarism lends itself to generalization. What other instruments are types of action or types of actions could be used to improve the world morally? What other possible instruments or types of actions are there that could be usefully employed? The word morally. Sorry, this was a repetition. This question gives the third part of welfare ethics a more general and broader content than that of deontology, namely that of a praxeology understood as the theory of the active dealing with moral evaluations of various objects, and that is a theory of what we should do in practice with to morally improve the world, whereby this should is not meant deontologically as an expression of moral commandment, but conciliarity, an advice for all kinds of possible courses of action. Several other recent developments also point in this direction of praxeology that goes beyond deontology. There are theories of the third part of welfare ethics that no longer provide for any moral imperatives or duties at all, such as Norcross Scala utilitarianism, or conversely those proposed by Hardin or various ethicists, for instance, Christ, Jamieson, Driver, Bradley, Pettit, which additionally provide for institutions or virtues, or global utilitarianism proposed by Parfit, Pettit, Smith, Driver, Jamieson, and Grape, which seeks to optimize all other objects morally. This indicates that a more comprehensive praxeological understanding of this third part of welfare ethics is necessary, to which these theories then attempt to contribute. So I come to my fourth section, instrument welfarism as a special praxeological theory. In the following, instrument welfarism is presented and justified as a special theoretical approach within the discipline of praxeology. It answers the praxeological question of what we should do in practice to improve the moral world with an instrumentalist conception. What should we do in practice to improve the world morally with an instrumentalist conception? What possible instruments for moral improvement of the world are there, and which of them should be used sensibly in each case now? The simplest welfarist praxeologies are Scala welfarism and act welfarism. I'll see that here. And that is the implicit recommendation to do moral good action to one's own judgment, or the non-binding duty to always to do the welfaristically best. These two simplistic praxeologies ignore a number of problems and overlook important opportunities for improving the world. Instrument welfarism, on the other hand, attempts to overcome the following problems and challenges precisely through the instrumentalist conception, that is, the use of appropriate instruments. The first problem then would be discrepancy between prudential and moral evaluation. Instrumental welfarism attempts to overcome the frequently occurring discrepancy between prudential and moral evaluation. This discrepancy manifests itself in particular in insufficient motivation to act morally. Instrument welfarism overcomes this discrepancy in part by ensuring that the instruments it develops also make moral action prudentially optimal, or at least advantageous. For example, by introducing sanctions in progressive norm welfarism. This attempt is a better alternative to Sidgwick's utilitarianism. Sidgwick clearly analyzed the discrepancy between prudential and moral evaluation, but he saw no way of resolving this discrepancy. Instead, in a somewhat existentialistic manner, he simply advocated acting according to moral evaluations, that is, utilitarianism, with a moral duty of optimization. In doing so, he failed to resolve the discrepancy, a task that instrumental welfarism, on the other hand, sets itself. Second difficulty, potential for cooperation and coordination. Instrument welfarism seeks to exploit the possibilities of coordinated or cooperative action in order to achieve moral improvements in the world that are more effective than those possible for an individual or an uncoordinated group of individuals. Third difficulty, that is epistemic difficulty. Instrument welfarism attempts to solve moral epistemic problems, in particular different difficulties in recognizing what is required or recommended in the current situation, or in requiring too many resources for this recognition. Morally good norms with clear rules of conduct are already such instruments. Fourth problem, the limited scope for action. Instrument welfarism does not rely on one instrument to improve the world, but uses a variety of instruments to improve the world for reasons of effectiveness, efficiency, and the broadening of moral scope for action. With this program for solving various fundamental problems and exploiting opportunities, instrument welfarism transforms a radical idea of utilitarianism, namely to morally optimize the world. It does this in a clever way by considering the limits and obstacles to which optimization, instead of simply ignoring them as in act welfarism, and specifically attempting to overcome them with the help of good instruments. I come now to my fifth part. So what happened here? Okay, fifth part, instrument. The parts of instrument welfarism. Instrument welfarism has two constructive tasks and thus consists of two main parts. First, there is first level more instruments to be developed. So in this first part of the theory, the structure and functioning of suitable moral instruments are explored. Old instruments are analyzed and improved, and new ones are invented and perfected. Sub-theories are developed for the individual instruments. What exactly do the instruments look like? What can they do? And so on. Second level moral instruments. In the second part of the theory, meta-instruments for dealing with these instruments are developed. Is there a hierarchy between them? How widely should they be used? So let us go now to the theory of the first level moral instruments. The following things in particular can be first moral instruments for the direct creation of moral values, provided they are appropriately out-oriented, including first, simple, morally good action. So we are here now. Simple, morally good action. Morally good action is also the substance of all other instruments. However, morally good action must then play a special role. It becomes, for example, the fulfillment of a moral duty, a supererogatory act, or the role action of a state official. Other moral instruments then are, number two, requests to others, targeted instruction and information, education, rules of thumb that many for individual action, social rules that many people follow publicly, socially valid norms with a variety of components such as moral duties, norm-compliant action itself, instruction, monitoring, penalties, attribution of retrospective responsibility, and allocation of prospective responsibility. 8. Supererogatory acts, which go beyond the required morally compliant behavior. 9. Virtues. 10. Institutions of all kinds. For instance, the institution of temporal cooperation. 11. Organizations, for instance, social welfare organizations, certain NGOs. The state itself, with its many subdivisions. Or confederations. More precisely, all these things are, in terms of their structure, initially only possible moral instruments. In order to become real moral instruments, they must be morally structured or transformed accordingly. This moral structuring and transformation is then a more political task. This list of possible moral instruments for improving the world morally is very diverse, and it raises the question of what moral instruments actually are. First of all, moral instruments can be divided into several main groups. This comes now here. So these are the groups. Group 1, morally good actions of individuals who are employed in different positions with a special moral function. For instance, compliance with norms, supererogatory acts, moral political commitment, support for norms. Group 2, morally oriented general collective agents, which are so well organized morally that they use their collective actions to produce more or less morally good things. For instance, the good states, other regional authorities, confederations. Group 3, instruments dedicated to specific moral purposes. So there we have more virtues, more knowledge, more rules of thumb, more education, more norms, more rules, socially security system, for instance, social assistance, emergency support systems, such as homeless shelters. In addition, there are other instruments that are not specifically moral instruments with a fluid transition between the two groups. There is the group 4. These are morally influenced instruments, that is, instruments that are more or less strongly influenced by morality but do not primarily have a moral function. For instance, public schools, national health systems, universities, health insurance. Or morally regulated instruments, that is, instruments that are morally regulated, that is restricted in their design or use, but are not morally conceived. Everyday items such as cars, refrigerators, means of transport infrastructure, all of these are subject to certain morally justifiable or justified restrictions. For instance, regulations for certain safety measures in cars. Group 6, these are instruments without moral function, are the residual class. They have no specific moral function and are not even morally regulated. In particular, instruments manufactured for private use that are not distributed via public exchange or the market, or a homemade cake, a self-built cabinet. The boundary between moral instruments and instruments that are not specifically moral, that is, the boundary between the groups 3 and 4, is whether the standard function of the instrument was designed on the basis of the moral desirability function to increase moral desirability, or whether the standard function of the instrument was at most influenced by moral considerations or supplemented by moral secondary functions. As mentioned above, in praxeology, there must be a separate subtheory for each of the moral instruments in which morally good or the best instruments of the type in question are developed, and rules or conditions for them or for their adequate use are elaborated. For instance, the theory of the morally good state. So I speak now about the theory of moral instruments of the second level. The second part of the theory of the realization of moral values is devoted to the morally optimal use of these moral instruments. Among other things, it has the following tasks. First, a theory of the extent of moral commitment, which draws on the lessons learned from the problems of excessive demand. Among other things, determines the extent of the moral budget, that is, it sets limits such as the binding minimum moral commitment of the subjects, or general limits of acceptability and fundamental rights. Second subtype, so that has been lost here, of moral investment goals must determine where and to what extent the limited moral commitment should be used, and in doing so also find an answer to the problem of universalism versus parochialism and establish rules for conflict. For example, a budget for rich countries which could stipulate that 2% of the national budget should be spent on development aid. Or a budget for individuals could stipulate that 5% of the net income should be donated to highly efficient welfare organizations. A third task would be a theory of instruments use closely intertwined with the theory of investment goals must determine where and to what extent first-order moral instruments are best used to solve which problems and which provisions take precedence in the event of conflict. For instance, moral duties take precedence over supererogation. Finally, the final task is a moral political theory must develop strategies for the social enforcement of the appropriate or optimal instrument. So I come now to the last part of my talk, a look at some sub-theories of instrument welfarism. To give an expression of the sub-theories of praxeology, I can refer here already to the outline of progressive norm welfarism, which clarifies how morally good norms and duties must be established. However, I would like to outline a second example here, the theory of the morally good state, which, according to its structure, implements measures that are morally good, are as morally good as possible. The core idea of this theory would be that under certain minimum economic and cultural conditions, a certain type of deliberative democracy could be the morally best form of government. Deliberative democracy here means representative parliamentary democracy, second, in which official institutional political decisions are accompanied by lively political debates with broad participation in a critical public sphere in the Habermasian sense, outside political institutions. Third, the epistemic characteristic of deliberative democracy is that it is characterized by intensive and extensive argumentation in the narrow epistemological sense, with an effective orientation towards truth. So, to number 5. It is an empirical, to number 1, sorry. It is an empirical fact. Oh, he is missing something. So, I want to provide now some reasons for this thesis that deliberative democracy might be a best form of a state which can then serve to be an instrument for moral improvement of the world. First, it is an empirical fact that debates in deliberative democracy do not usually consist of the participants emphasizing the advantage of a particular measure to be decided upon for their own interests or those of a particular group, as would be expected in a liberal model of democracy as a platform for negotiation to assert one's interests. No, rather, the participants in the debate try to show that the measure they propose serves the common good, or the best. This is probably because in deliberative democracies, where the agenda of a particular political party is not simply determined by a small number of party leaders, a sufficiently large coalition of like-minded people can only be achieved under this condition, that is, by referring to the general good. This orientation towards the common good also means that discourse in democracy has a clear epistemic task. The discourse is about answering the question truthfully, which of the alternative measures best serves the common good. This means, on the other hand, that state decisions are directly oriented towards the common good. Second reason. Okay, yeah, second reason. On the other hand, they are given a form that also allows for epistemic optimization in the search for the best alternative, so that the deliberatively reached decision actually optimizes the common good. A third reason, the participatory democratic component solves the following problem. So now we go to the next slide. Discourse, that is finding out which would be the best solution, only provides knowledge, not its implementation. Only the democratic participation of all gives moral insights their power, to the extent that individuals are guided by these insights in their electoral decisions. And a fourth reason, and both the participatory and epistemic components solve yet another problem. To date, there is no consensus and very different ideas about how the common good should be defined at all. Nor is it to be expected that agreement will be reached on this in the near future. Deliberation then also has the function of advancing the discussion of the definitions of the common good in terms of content. And as long as no epistemic agreement has been reached, democratic voting also has the function of deciding on the criteria to be applied in the common good according to the strongest social support. This was my second example of a welfare instrumentalist approach in praxeology. In this case, a theory of the state. This brings me to the end of my presentation and welfare instrumentalist praxeology. I hope I have fulfilled my two tasks, namely to show that deontology must be expanded into praxeology and that instrument welfarism is ideally suited to fulfilling this praxeological program. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you listen to me because I am using the other computer?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Yes.
Enough.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation. Let's start our discussion, questions, comments. We have questions from Svetlana Valinchenko. Yes?
Yes, and I invite all the participants to speak up or write in chat.
Please read it. I have some trouble to read all of these questions on the part in my computer.
Yes, my question was whether moral improvement is possible during some crisis time, during the war, for instance. And another question was if Megalopsychus, I hope I pronounce it correctly, I mean Aristotle's term, if it has any sense during some deep crisis or war, for instance, in terms of contempt to some lack of virtue or lack of duty. I'd like to ask about the limits of the theory.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. Of course, moral improvement is not always possible in certain situations, but I think in the long run it is possible. And we see also periods in history where there was a backdraw. And this is not a theory that holds that we have a continuous progress here. Yeah, but to prevent regression, or simply stalemate in the moral development, that is the task of the individuals. And I think this is sort of by-lecture of what I have said, that it is up to you, up to us to act, to promote all these things. We cannot expect to and cannot rely simply on norms which are there. We have to enforce these norms. We have to introduce them. So it depends on the strength of those people who are inclined in some moral sense. Yeah. And so that is also a question. Of course, there are, it is the case here now in Ukraine, which is attacked by Russia. Of course, this also has an effect on the social and political landscape here in the country. But it means here also that may perhaps even put a breaking to some developments which were progressive. But it means that we have to struggle for the improvement, and that, as I said, that it only depends on us, and to put it forward, of course, with not having the guarantee that we will be successful. Unfortunately, I think the theory cannot say more about this. Yeah, and about the limit, I think this is a limit. But this kind of theory reminds us that it all depends on our action. Is that something which gives roughly an answer to what you would like to have answered?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Svetlana. Please, you are welcome to discussion, to questions.
May I take a question?
Yeah. Yes.
May I?
Yes, of course. You can ask. Yeah.
Nina Polishchuk. Yes. May I take?
Yes, you're welcome.
You are welcome to the question. Please
yes, thank you. I very thankful to Professor Lumer for his, as I see them, theoretically and practically effective ideas in his lecture. And my research field is philosophy of pragmatism, especially its American branch. And in view of this, my question, I have two questions. First question is of general character, and the second question is more concrete. First question is of this kind. Do you see, Professor Lumer, some cross points between philosophy of pragmatism and instrument welfarism? It is a general question. And second, more concrete, you write in your text, social norms, it's your text, from your text, social norms are ways of acting that are widely followed in a particular group. And maybe to say, how do you think? Maybe to say about social norms in this way, social norms as habits of action, following terms that Peirce used in his philosophy. It's a short question.
Yeah, I thank you very much, Professor Polishchuk. To the first question, I think there is some, I would not say a direct, let's say, development from pragmatism to what I did, because I'm not a scholar of pragmatism. But I see some relation there. The idea that we have to intervene, that philosophy has to have practical consequences. And I think this is an idea which binds the two approaches. And I think this is rather well to be seen. So in this sense, it is also pragmatistic, yeah, what I've proposed. But of course, there would be different solutions when we come, for instance, to epistemology, how that would be to be spelled out. But this general idea, I think, is quite in common between the two approaches. About the social norms, I have to admit that I do not know enough about the proposal of whom did you mention? Peirce, yes, thank you. Peirce, about Peirce, what he has in mind with these kinds of habits. Habits, of course, in the usual sense of the word, are something less weak than norms, because habits can be followed individually and they are not sanctioned if they are not followed any longer in a certain moment. Yeah, and so that would be something much weaker. It would be good to get internalized the obedience to morally good social norms by habitualizing them. But this is then already a second part, so that we therefore do not need the punishment threat. Yeah, but the idea here would be, in particular, to get people into the boat to acting according to morals via these special motivation that in case of violation of the norm, there is the threat of punishment, and that is different to habit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are continuing our dialogue and discussion. Thank you for the interesting questions and proposition how to continue. Please, Professor Gardashuk Tatiana.
First of all, thank you very much, Professor Lumer, for your lecture that provide many food for thinking. And I have a question about concerning including nature and natural resources in the system of your concept, particularly in the system of values you use for in your concept for and role of nature in the role of attitude of nature in functioning of other social instruments of welfarism, because for instance we can't avoid, I wouldn't ask now about intrinsic value of nature, but definitely I want to ask about the role of instrumental values of nature and natural resources. And because most of or almost all modern concepts of approaches to study of welfare, well-being, prosperity, good life, and so on includes nature and natural resources into consideration as a consistent part of human life and social relations and for functioning of social institutes.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. No, you're completely right, but you already mentioned the solution or the answer I would give, that we have here to differentiate between intrinsic values and instrumental values. And so this is, of course, a tradition within welfaristic ethics, that they usually think of the things which have intrinsic value as something which is quite personal, bound to the person. So that in, let's say, speaking in the terms of ecological ethics, this would in the end be a sort of anthropocentrism. It would not be a sort of, for instance, organicism or something like that. Yeah, and the instrumental value of nature is, of course, clear. We need it for survive. We need that for our recreation. We enjoy certain forms of nature and so on. These are all instrumental values for humans, and so preserving the resources and preserving a valuable nature, that is, of course, something which improves much the utility of all persons involved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Katerina Karpenko, Kharkov, is welcome, our heroic Kharkov. Yeah. And I would like to tell Katerina Karpenko was the participant of our first seminar and first meeting with Christoph at the time of the conference in Berlin, September 2022. Please, your question.
Thank you so much, Professor Lumer, for your brilliant report. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for your that you are in Ukraine now, that you are very brave. And since the first days of this war, you support us. You tried to explain what is war, what is the ethic war, what is the ethics war. Okay, as for your report today, it is very beautiful list of questions and consequences, and you disclose that deliberative democracy as a part of maybe epistemic ethics also, it gives only knowledge. It's okay, but it is not enough. You emphasize this. I agree with you. And I agree with you absolutely that this stage in the process of knowledge should be continue. The more effective instruments should be found, and praxeology for welfare ethics is really the ontology and praxeology are very essential. We may find more desirable norms, agreements, and stages. The subjects of this process you described very deeply. Yes, I agree with you. And I want to be back to the beginning of your lecture today, when you gave us an example about a doctor who sometimes can conclude, can try to help individual, even in the case if there is discrepancy between individual desire and a decision, doctor's decision. Yeah, it is some kind of contradiction. In my mind, there is some parallel between Ukraine and this kind of patient who do not understand maybe, or who are waiting for help from instrumental welfare ethics. What do you think? How can you explain? Maybe you can give Ukraine some examples or some more consistent system of values to reach our consolidation in society for achievement more results. Yes, you told that NGOs, instructions and confederation of states. Yes, now you are representative of Italy and Germany, and you are in Ukraine. It means that there is some kind of confederation of states in discussion of these questions. And what it means that we are waiting, we appreciate very much your present in, you are very brave, really. And this is also some kind of praxeological ethics. You are try to implement this ethics. It's your position. And please, maybe you can give more practical examples or advices to us. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm so glad that you are here, Katarina. And if I may be personal in this sense, Professor Karpenko. And no, but I have to say, you praised me. I think the people to be praised, these are the Ukrainians. So they are much braver than me. They have to support, they have to live in the war conditions all the time. I'm here for 10 days and that's it. And so that is a big difference. And I'm very, very impressed by the strength of the people here in Ukraine. But to come to your question, yeah, what can I say? What advice can I give? I'm an outsider, but I think the point I spoke at the end of my talk about, namely deliberative democracy, I think this would be an important thing, that this also should be a society, an all-including society, that no one is excluded from the society by imposing certain conditions of culture or so. Everyone who sustains the values of this society should be counted as a valuable member, and his culture should be accepted. Should be accepted. And so I think this is a very important lecture, perhaps for the present development in Ukraine. Go in this direction, go ahead in this direction. And what regards on the international level, this perhaps is something which can only be resolved on the European level, for instance, that the Europeans should much more sustain the Ukrainian people, and but of course the Ukrainians make pressure, and I think they are doing a good job here in this respect to get the European Union on their side. And this, I think, should be answered by the European people and the European states. So this, I think, is something where you can't do anything more than what you have done already. I don't know if I can give more advices at this moment here. Perhaps that is at least a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Please, if you will have questions, comments.
May I ask a question? Because the button of raise hand doesn't work in my screen. May I ask a question?
Thank you so much, Professor Natalia Vyatkina, one of the best friends of the philosophers of Odessa.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So, dear Professor, you are lucky to be in Odessa, because for many years I haven't been to Odessa, and I'm dreaming to come once again. Well, yeah, so my impression is that, and thank you for your very informative and goal setting paper. So, but this approach, or the trends of such kind of ethics, sounds utopian, but this is from the first glance, of course, because it contains a lot of interesting implications for thinking about and thinking over. And but my questions are such two questions. What do you think? How does cultural context influence the identification of morally good social norms? And the second, can you provide contemporary examples where an instrumental approach to moral policy has succeeded or failed? Thank you.
Okay. No, perhaps, thank you very much for your question, Professor Vyatkina. No, perhaps to the first remark, that sounds quite utopian. I didn't want to design an utopia, but I think at least to give ideas about possible improvements, and that I think is already something. I'm not speaking of an end stage that should be reached and that never will be reached. So, but we can all the way down make some improvement. But coming to your questions, is there a cultural context? The cultural context already is given in the more in my relying on or in the theories relying on the socially valid norms. Of course, these are inspired by or not only inspired, these are very much structured and formed by present culture in a state. But there was this other element. Of course, we have to have such cultural influence on our norms, but I think it should undergo a moral rating, and that was the second condition of having a moral obligation. That is, that these socially valid moral norms should be morally good. And that should be the measure by which we should evaluate the existing social norms. And if they are not morally good, they have to be changed or even abandoned. Yeah. And so I wouldn't say that the position is completely universalistic in this respect, but it is, on the other hand, not relativistic. There is a guidance by these moral values, yeah, the moral evaluation. To your second question, is there an instrumentalist approach which has succeeded so far? I think much of practice which we can observe is already, let's say, something which is going on, and of which the theory I've described is only a description. For instance, people are trying to improve the moral norms of their countries all the time. There are protesters, there are parliamentary members who try to improve the social norms of their countries. And I think in this respect, what I've described is only a description of an already ongoing practice. Yeah. And what was only missing here was that theory, ethical theory, didn't take this into its own theory, so that they didn't reflect about the preconditions of what they are preaching about, namely moral norms. Yeah. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. How are you? Are you tired?
No, it's all okay with me. We can continue that for a long time, but I think at some point we have to stop that, and that is up to you.
Any questions, comments?
May I ask one more question? You haven't mentioned anything about concerning the role of law and protecting it, this kind of moral philosophy needs, or moral position in practice needs safeguarding and or dealing within some kind of norms. And what about the correlation between these individual norms, instrumental norms of this kind of moral philosophy, and the law?
Legal norms. Yeah. So no, thank you for that question, but it makes clear that I didn't explain quite good enough what I intended. So there was an inclusion of legal norms into the system I've proposed, or into the theory I've proposed, and that has been introduced here. I have to confess, not in this language, but I spoke of the differentiation between formal and informal norms, where the formal norms are sustained, and, for instance, the punishment is executed by especially authorized persons. And I think this is only a different way of speaking of legal norms. So these legal norms are part of the system I have proposed. Yeah. So we need that. Many moralists think that legal norms are something quite different from moral norms. This is not a case. For instance, even the simplest case, that is forbidden to kill other people, of course, this, only because it is a legal norm, also doesn't stop to be a moral norm as well. So the legal norm would be a much more stronger norm, or let's say in a certain way strengthened norm, by which we can have still stronger motivation to follow it. So these are perhaps even the more important moral norms. Yeah.
So they are presupposed within your within this construction. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yaroslav Lyubimый.
Yeah.
Please.
Dear Professor Lumer, I thank for your being in Ukraine, and I want to put you some question. How you appreciate the idea of basic and instrumental values in implementation to idea of instrumental dimension of welfare ethics and the basic ethical values? Thank you.
Yeah. This was a question, if I understood it well, about the relation between instrumental and, as I would say, then intrinsic values. Or you explained, or you mentioned that, used a different term for it. So the idea in that theory would be that we have as intrinsic values the well-being of the persons, and all the machinery which I've spoken about would be instrumental to serve these intrinsic values. But of course there is something more, that within the evaluation by moral criteria, by moral value criteria, we also consider questions of justice, of the distribution, who has precedence within, if we can promote the well-being of different persons, but alternatively so only. Yeah? So this is also built into it. But the whole thing here is about then being an instrument for, yeah, improving the well-being of the persons. And perhaps, I don't know if this is already a sufficient answer to what you wanted to know, Professor Yaroslav.
Thank you, understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Khudenko. And after that, Professor Boychenko. Let's start, Andrei.
Thank you for the report, Professor Lumer. I have two questions to clarify some meaning and the volumes of the word instrument that you used. In what sense is this word used? Are they rings of action, means of action, or device of action, moral action? For example, what about daily habits? Are they instrument? And the second question about the volume of this word instrument. I assume that we are dealing not with a single instrument, but with a certain complex. And question is this complex a set of instrument or a certain sequence or some kind of fitting mechanics, one instrument to other? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting questions, Professor Khudenko. Many thanks. Are habits instruments? I think virtues may be some sort of habit, can go in this direction. In this sense, I would say habits may even be instruments that we can install, for instance, in people certain habits. Perhaps virtue ethicists would call it more than character traits or so. But some character traits perhaps are only habits. And in this sense, I would say, yes, of course, if we try to inculcate in persons certain habits, that would be an instrument. If these are the good the good habits, of course, this could be a moral instrument. Yeah. And the second question regarded the relation between the various instruments. I haven't thought so much about the system of them so far. This was only a selection and simply a set of one instrument added to the other. But I think in the second part of the theory I've described, that is the meta-level theory, which speaks about the application of the various instruments. Of course, this has to be a very big topic, which instrument to use for what aim and how to integrate the various instruments. Yes, but I haven't said about that anything here in my talk today. This would be, I fear, only a task for the future. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Professor Boychenko, Kyiv.
Thank you. Dear Professor, I have a question for you. What is your theoretical assessment, or maybe even practical attitude to the concept of living constitution? This concept is emerged in USA, and it is a part of a tradition of judicial pragmatism. Yeah? And what is your normative assessment of this tradition or this concept?
Thank you very much for that question, Professor Wojczenko. But I have to admit, you have first to tell me more about that concept of a living constitution. I have my ideas about what it could be, but perhaps this is not correct because I don't know it as a technical term. Perhaps you can say something more about it for explaining your question.
It's okay. It's very interesting concept. Maybe will be useful for you, for your...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but perhaps you can say more than I can say that it is that it would be helpful for the theory. So that we have to have a living constitution in the sense that people have to know about it, defend it, know the justification for it, and then be able to defend it. In this sense, of course, that would be completely in line with what I have proposed. I spoke of these two kinds of action which have to do with the existence of norms. One was norm support, yeah, and which go beyond simply to applying the norm, following the norm. So this would fall under this second category, that is that we have to support the norms. And I think a living constitution would be something like that.
I think something very close to it, maybe some practice of permanent improvement of constitution, permanent adding of some new norms to the large corpus of the main norms.
Yeah, of course, that would be also in line with what I have proposed. I mainly led away a further adjective to the theory of norms I proposed, that was progressive norm welfarism. And in this further adjective, you have this idea that we shall not simply remain content with what we have reached. Also, constitution has to be transformed, has to be improved in historical terms. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions? I would like to, I only just know that we are working 1 hour and a half, more than. Oh, Professor Karpenko, please.
I would like to ask maybe a personal question about your attitude to communicative ethics and about correlation between things you talk about and communicative ethics, instrumental reason and communicative reason, communicative norms and instrumental norms and virtues, understanding of virtues. What is your attitude? Or it is separate theme, it is not connected to with your concept, or there is some kind of parallels?
Perhaps I may answer with a question for getting it more precise, what you mean by the communication ethics. Should that be something, for instance, like a Habermasian ethic?
Habermas this kind of where instrumental norms are criticized, and it is presupposed that you need to be more careful to communicative ethics, communicative values. Maybe you talked about, I found some correlation between your argumentation and some aspects of communicative ethics, communicative practical philosophy of Habermas and Apple.
So, yeah, I think at least one component is very strong in what I've said, which is also, I think, going back completely, in a certain sense, to Habermas, the idea of a deliberative democracy, or the theory of the deliberative democracy, of course, has been developed by Habermas. And so this was a very, very important contribution of him. About the foundations of ethics, I'm of a different idea about him, because his idea to speak of norms as being that which can be approved in an ideal discourse by all the people participating in that discourse, or all people who could be interested in such a norm. I think this is a sort of circular description. This does not bring us far ahead. And because people should know what they have to deliberate about, and you cannot define the end of the deliberation by already referring to the end of the deliberation. So I think this would be a problematic approach. And in this respect, I'm not on the side of Habermas. And what about communication itself? I think communication norms in a narrower sense are quite important, of course, but they would fall under the big or vast spectrum of all the norms we have. Of course, these include also communicative norms.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your activity, for really good dialogue. Maybe any questions, suggestions?
Well, I have a message from Professor Lach, and the question, if you see any trends or grounds of modern to postmodern transition that influence had an impact on this theory.
No, postmodern part isn't in it, because of course postmodern theories would be quite relativistic usually, and wouldn't sustain an epistemological foundation. And I think this would be an error, to not rely on universal values and rely on universal criteria, what is true, and so on. And in this sense, the theory I've presented would not be conform with a postmodern theory. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Some questions? Thanks a lot. We created today a great atmosphere of communication. We created today first step, maybe not first, but very important step to collaboration with Institute of Philosophy, with other philosophical community of Ukraine, and a discussion about very important questions, especially when our good philosophical friends are here, will be here, will stay here with us. I'm so happy that we fulfilled our desire. My many thanks to Svetlana Balinchenko, many thanks to Department of Philosophy Kryvyi Rih, Pedagogical University. We are in the center of this event, but maybe, I hope it will be, you would like to revise again this token. Please, I hope record will soon, you will find on the page of Department of Philosophy, Kryvyi Rih University, Odessa University, and Professor Christoph Lumer. You are welcome to publish your article in our best philosophical journals, Filosofska Dumka, Doxa, Philosophy of Mind, maybe else, not only your article, but your diary, your memoirs about your visit into Ukraine. Our program today is not finished with Professor Lumer. After some hour, we will continue our dialogue in public sphere after brilliant project that was organized by philosophers too, philosophers of Odessa and art critics, and especially, first of all, one soldier who is now in the first line of the front. It's a real brilliant, not brilliant, but very impressive art project, and we will continue to talk about project Air of Memory and discuss problem ethics and war in public space of Odessa. Thank you so much, Professor Lumer, for involvement in these activities. Your visit and your desire to be here with us is very important. Thank you.
I would like to thank you as well, all the participants which have been here and all those who contributed to the discussion. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Golubovich and all the other organizers of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the great event.
Thank you very much to organizers and to Inna Golubovich, Professor Lumer, and everyone who attended this event, and for our communication and dialogue. We are missing such kind of communication in this wartime.
Thank you.
Thank you.